We're at the point in quarantine where I've started watching Lost again. So if that's any indication of where my mental state is, I don't know what else is. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jer. And today, in honor of me finishing Lost for probably like 5th time and being more disappointed than the first time, which I'm not disappointed at the ending, I'm disappointed at how the show just didn't age well. I'm disappointed that there were so many plot holes. I'm disappointed that they just wrote themselves into corners that they decided not to get out of. So here we are. In honor of me finishing the series again, I've decided that I'm going to rank all of the characters, or at least the important ones. Sorry, Ernst. And with that, I've created a very technical list of mathematic equations involving a lot of numbers. Not really, that's all total BS. I'm going to be rating these characters. I couldn't decide if I wanted to rate them based off of how least damaging they were to the plot, how least damaging they were to the other characters, what they contributed to the island, what they contributed story-wise, what their potential could have been. So I just mashed them all together. So I'm gonna go off of names that I found on the wiki that were listed as main characters. Basically, I tried to grab anybody that had a fleshed out backstory. If they had a flashback that was kind of fleshed out. So like Danielle, even though she didn't get a fully devoted episode, during the time jump episode, we did see multiple clips of her backstory. Therefore, we can parse them all together and create what her flashback would have been if she had one. But someone like Alex only really got a shot of her when she was a kid on a swing with Ben, and that doesn't count. So that was my parameter. So we'll start off with Richard. Richard is a good character and was just roped into this game for all of the wrong reasons, and he has no idea why he was roped into the game. So for that, Richard is getting A tier. He was just trying to save his wife. Next we have Kate. Kate was supposed to be the leader, but because of sexism, they decided to make it Jack. Kate would have been a great leader. She already was very good at what she did. She had a great backstory. They complicated it a little bit by having her get married, having her run away again. But just kidding, now she's gonna be Aaron's mom. I think if they hadn't complicated Kate so much, she could have been higher. So for that, I give her rank B. Next we have Juliet. And I don't even need to say anymore because Juliet is S tier. Next we have Boone, who is an unnecessarily complicated character, but also just an awful one. Boone is really terrible. And Boone is kind of insufferable and is always just yelling and angry. Boone gets D tier because the whole like, I want to sleep with my stepsister thing is weird to me. I don't like it. And I'm allowed not to like that. Next we have Ana Lucia, who would have had a much bigger role if Michelle Rodriguez was not one of the most difficult people to work with, and if she wasn't constantly breaking rules. So for that, Ana Lucia is going to get a C tier because she had a lot of potential. No, I'm changing that, I'm redacting it. Ana Lucia is B tier. Next we have Michael, the man who's always screaming about his child. It was annoying back in the early 2000s, and it's annoying now. He was just always yelling, and he had no other drive, and I hate nothing more than characters who their only motivation is their child. That's the only thing that keeps them going. That's the only thing that motivates their story. There are characters that do it very well, like Darth Vader. But Michael is just... Michael is like Sandra Bullock in Bird Box. Plus, Michael wanted to offload Walt right away. And then as soon as they got to the island, suddenly he wanted to be the world's best dad, and his character motivations kept shifting. He's a terrible character. He was awful to his wife. Michael's D tier. Then we have Mr. Echo, who could have been such a great character, and I think had a lot of potential right from the get. And I think they really were just leaning into the religious thing a little bit too much. And then his connection to the island that never really got explained. But he was a good character. Mr. Echo is getting a high C tier, but low B tier. Kind of right in the middle. Next we have Daniel Faraday. And Daniel is such a great character, and he has a lot to offer. There are moments where Daniel's character seems like he might be on the autism spectrum, which is great representation for television. But then there are other times where they make it seem like that's not the case. And I think if that representation had been handled well, I think Daniel could be an S tier character, but he's gonna be A tier. Next we have Nikki, and I don't know why she was listed on the wiki as a main character, because I think her appearances were only like 4 episodes, but she did have a fleshed out backstory, so for that she's on this list. Nikki's fierce, and I think her story could have been really fascinating if they had actually developed them more prior to the episodes where they killed them off. And I think that weak attempt to try to build them up so that they could have their episode in season 3 really just didn't go anywhere. Expose was a fun idea. The idea of them stealing the gems and loving each other but hating each other at the same time. There were a lot of things that could have been really good. And so for that, the promise of what they could have been, they're getting a C tier. Next we have Sawyer, who I think is obviously an A tier. I don't think we have to argue about this. The only reason why he's not an S tier is because what is holding him back? Because he's gorgeous. He has a lot of depth. Screw it. He's S tier. Next we have Desmond. He got stranded on the island and he ended up getting ripped through space and time to different realities and experiencing different things at different times. And he didn't ask for any of this nonsense. He just wanted to go running and get married to Penny and prove Charles Widmore that he was a bad man. That Charles was a bad man, not that Desmond was a bad man. Desmond was a good man, but Charles was a bad man, and that's what he was trying to prove. He didn't want that. He didn't want all this stuff, okay? So for that, Desmond is going to be B tier. Next we have Saeed, and I think in the early 2000s, representation of somebody from the Middle East was kind of monumental, but they made such an error that did not age well of vacillating between referring to him as a terrorist, all that racism that was coded into that. But they tried to, what were they trying to do with him? Boy, did that not age well. And again, the representation is so important. Like Saeed, who was such a good character and was always trying to help the underdog and was always trying to do the right thing, and just kind of kept getting roped into these situations that Saeed didn't ask to be in. No fault of his own or the actor, who also did an incredible job. Saeed gets A tier, but the writers for Saeed and their racism get an F. Next we have Jin, who I don't have to say it. Jin is an S tier. Jin will always be an S tier. Not to mention the fact that Daniel Day Kim is one of the sexiest men alive. And you can fight me on that. Also, I love that he just decided at one point that he was not going to age. He was like, I'm done. Next we have Sun, who again is an S tier, and y'all can fight me if you disagree. Sun and Jin's romance through the entire series is one of the most complex and one of the most well handled, I think, of the entire series. They have the best story together. They have the best stories apart. They have the best backstories. Everything that they do makes sense. There's never a moment where they do something that seems out of character for them, where most of the other characters kind of vacillate in this weird place where they're doing something that their character might not actually do, but because the writers strike and that weird episode where Jack got the tattoo, there were decisions that they made on Lost. There were a lot of decisions, and I don't know if they were good ones. Sun always followed through with things, and she had that incredible moment where she approached Charles Widmore and was like, we both want to kill Ben Linus, so let's do it. And she had her hair all laid, and she was all fierce and just like ready for murder. Sun is the one. Next we have Frank Lapidus. I don't know why I included him on this list, but for sentimental reasons, we'll keep him on here. He also did kind of have a backstory. Not really. Frank is C tier because he just didn't really do much. Next we have Charlotte, and I think this actress is fierce. I think everything she does is great. I think her choices in the show were really good. I think Charlotte had a lot of promise. I think the way that they kind of play with her character and kind of make her ambiguous of what her goals and motivations are is really interesting. And I think she's probably one of the most interesting off the freighter crew right off the get-go. And so for that, I'm going to give Charlotte an A tier. Next we have Ben Linus, and Ben is a disaster of a character. But it's not because he's badly written, it's because he just is a mess. Ben is probably one of the most flawed of all the characters, and I think he's very well written in that sense that he's got all these complex things that you don't want to like him, but you kind of do. You want him to die, but then you want to see what he's going to do next. And on top of the fact that the actor does an incredible job portraying all these layered nuances, and so for that, Ben is an A tier, but he's not an S tier because I don't think he's that good. He's got a lot of dark, complicated morals. Next we have Claire. And Claire is another one of those, they're all complicated. I don't know why I keep saying complicated, but Claire is complicated. She's got a very difficult past. She created an accident that put her mom into a coma. She got pregnant and she didn't want the baby, and then she was gonna give it up, and then she wanted to keep it, and then she wanted to give it up, and then she wanted to keep it. Claire got assaulted in the jungle and then got needles stabbed into her, and then she lost her memory, and then she had to deal with Charlie running around and harassing her all the time and getting stalked by him. And then she was in love with Charlie, even though he was not good for her. And then she was just running around making coconut bombs for a while and crying about her stick baby. Claire's character went all over the place. She started out really good and then just kind of nosedived as the season went. So for that, Claire is going to get low B tier. Next we have Walt, who just wanted to live a normal life with his mom, and then this guy just showed up and took him away from his life where things were pretty good and cushy, and then he had to get stuck on an island that he didn't even want to be on, and then he thought he was crazy and went to a mental institution because he thought he made it all up, and then he got to go rule the island with Hurley and Ben. So there's a lot of promise for what Walt could have been. A lot of his story is kind of tainted by Michael and how terrible Michael is as a character. Walt's not that bad, and he got roped into some stuff he didn't want to be in. So for that, Walt's gonna get a B tier, because he didn't really get a lot of time on the show, and what he did, it was mostly trying to get away from Michael. Next we have Locke, who, in my opinion, is one of the most insufferable characters in Lost. And I think the writers were onto something with Locke all those years ago, because they wrote a male Karen. Sitting in an office screaming at a working person about why you should be allowed to do the thing that you want to do and that they're holding you back is such a Karen move. Locke constantly sabotaging the group to stay on the island, even though they didn't ask to stay on the island, even though they didn't want to be there, even though they wanted to go, destroying the radio system and hitting people over the back of the head so that they couldn't do what they were trying to do, and blowing up the submarine when Jack and Juliet just wanted to leave, and then being convinced that everybody had to come back to the island, and going through and convincing them all to go back when all that needed to happen was he needed to turn the wheel. Realistically, probably what the situation was is that Jacob didn't want Locke on the island anymore. So when he was supposed to turn the wheel, it started skipping through time because Ben did it. If Locke had done it, it probably wouldn't have skipped through time and everything would have been fine. But no, Locke just had to go and screw everything up. So Locke is a low D tier. If I could give Locke an F, I would put Locke in F. Screw it. I'm putting Locke in the category with the writers. Next we have Charlie, who's another just terrible character. And it's to no fault of the actor, who did a fine job with what he was dealt, which was a big pile of doo-doo. But Charlie is a terrible character. And I think the concept of writing someone who is addicted to drugs and is trying to get clean and, is trying to always do the right thing but can't always find the right path, I think there's something to be said about that in the early 2000s, and not a lot of people were writing those types of characters successfully. I don't think Charlie was necessarily handled with the most care and concern, and I think some of the biggest problems were that they made him so obsessed with Claire and Aaron, and it started getting really weird how clingy he was. And then Locke's whole story, nurturing him, even though Charlie didn't ask to, and then him going back to the heroin and holding on to it. There were so many things that they did wrong, so many things they did right in all of those scenarios I just mentioned. And there's something to be said about addiction and going back to the thing that you're comfortable with and needing it to be close. That was, I think, handled well. I think with him just getting so attached and strung to Claire was weird. So for that, I'm giving Charlie the D tier. The best thing he did was telling Desmond that it wasn't Penny's boat. Next we have Paolo, who again, I don't know why he's on this list, but for the same reason as what I mentioned with Nikki and the promise of what he had and what he was on the show and his small little backstory that we got, I'm gonna put Paolo in the upper C tier because there was potential. He was a sexy man. There were things he could have done. They didn't go there with him, but they could have. Next we have Hurley, who again is just an insufferable character, and they don't, I think, handle the mental health issue in the most sensitive way. And I think they kind of just make it like, Hurley's crazy, but they don't ever like handle it sensitively, in my opinion. And so again, the writers did a bad thing. Hurley himself is kind of obnoxious because he's always screaming about the numbers, and then he's always screaming about how they can't go back and how they have to do this and how they have to do that, and he's just exhausting. But again, he didn't ask for any of the nonsense that he got put through. He just played some numbers and they ended up being cursed. So Hurley gets C tier. Next we have Shannon, who is such an incredible character and probably could have had such a bigger arc if she wasn't linked to Boone so much in the most creepy way. And I think they realized that they needed to separate them. And once they did, Shannon started to blossom as a character. And her moments with Saeed were very touching and warm-hearted and gave me all the feels inside. And I think that she was, always trying to, she figured out something that the others hadn't, that kind of mystery secret of the island thing that Locke figured out. She was getting there. And to have her be killed was just really unnecessary. I don't think it was the right move. I think they probably could have navigated that whole section of the Tailies coming back to join the main cast. I think that could have been handled differently without killing Shannon. There are a lot of different ways they could have handled Shannon. However, she's gonna get an A tier because I think Shannon is a great character, and I think once we learn about her backstory and why she is the way that she is, I think there is a lot to say about how she navigated life. Next we have Jack, and much like Locke, he's kind of insufferable at times, and I think there were a lot of moments where he had good things going for him and they just kind of recycled plots a lot. And then that moment where he was helping that family and then the woman kissed him. It's just strange, unnecessary. And then going to get his tattoos that said something different than what they actually said. Jack had a lot of promise. He had a lot of opportunity, and the writers messed up, and that's their fault. So Jack gets a low B tier. Next we have Libby, who didn't quite get a fully fleshed out backstory, but we got enough of it through other characters' perspectives. I think there was so much that they could have done with her and kind of fleshed out the relationship with Hurley. And much like how I feel like Shannon's death was unnecessary, Libby's death was completely unnecessary. I understand killing off Ana Lucia, but Libby did not need to die. And again, the writers get an F for the way they handled Libby. Libby, however, gets a high C. Next we have Miles, who I think is a really fantastic, fun character. I think he has a lot to offer to the show. I think his motivations pretty much always stay true to him. He's always kind of out for himself. And I think his power is really cool, that he can talk to the dead. And I wish that had been fleshed out a little bit more. Like, why does he have that power? What about the island gave him this ability? What is his deal? Why does he have this power? The people want to know. I think Miles is an A tier character. Next we have Rose, and Rose is an S tier character. Rose is perfect, Rose is flawless, Rose is everything that all the characters could and should and would have been if the writers were better. For some reason, Bernard was not listed on this list, but here we are with Bernard, and I'm gonna put Bernard at a C tier because he's definitely not as strong of a character as Rose, and there was a lot of promise for Bernard, and he just didn't reach up to the same level that Rose was. Next we have Danielle, who actually lived in my hometown, and my mom had seen her a couple times, like walking around town sometimes, and I thought that was pretty cool. Danielle is a very cool character. I think her backstory is very interesting, and what happened to her is very interesting and fascinating, and and well written, and I think the way that they handled her was very good. I feel like the amount of time that we saw her was appropriate. I don't feel like she necessarily needed more or less time. I feel like her death happened at an appropriate moment. So Danielle gets an A tier. And this video has gone on for much too long. That is all the characters that I have for the main characters. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody super important. If I did, I apologize. Blame the wiki. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.